You remember Tim Howard, stretched across the Minas Gerais turf in the summer heat, hurling himself at shot after shot, while a Belgian team stacked with some of Europe's finest tried to break the United States apart. 16 saves. A World Cup record for a single match that still stands today. The USA lost that game in extra time 2-1. But that moment was decided years before anyone kicked a ball. Because what looked like a miracle in 2014 was actually the first clear signal of something quietly growing inside American football since the mid-1990s. A system taking root, a generation being shaped. And the team taking the field in 2026 is what that system looks like when it's fully grown. The USA is hosting the World Cup. For the first time in history, the real question isn't whether they deserve to be there. The question is whether they can win it. To understand why the answer might actually be yes, you have to go back further than you think. Not to 2022, not to 2014. You have to go back to 1994. When the United States won the right to host the 1994 World Cup, much of the football world reacted with a mix of confusion and quiet irritation. This was a country that called football soccer. A country where the sport ranked somewhere below ice hockey in the national sports conversation. FIFA decision was widely read as a commercial move, not a sporting one. But something unexpected happened. Over 3.5 million fans showed up. A World Cup attendance record that still hasn't been broken. And somewhere in the bleachers of Stanford Stadium and the Rose Bowl and Giant Stadium, a generation of American children watched their first World Cup in person and fell in love with the game. Not as spectators, as future players. That generation grew up. And when they were old enough, they made a choice that no American football generation before them had ever made at scale. They went to Europe. Christian Pulisic left home at 16. Think about that. 16 years old, moving alone to Dortmund, walking into a Borussia youth system that had already developed Mario Götze, Marco Reus, and a lineage of players who went on to define a generation of German football. He wasn't there as a cultural curiosity. He was there to compete. And he competed so effectively that he was representing Dortmund's first team before he was old enough to vote back home. Pulisic wasn't alone in this. Weston McKennie crossed the Atlantic to Schalke at 18. Gio Reyna, whose father Claudio had played at the 2002 World Cup for the United States, joined Pulisic at Dortmund and developed into one of the most technically gifted midfielders in the Bundesliga. Tyler Adams came through the Red Bull development structure in New York, moved to Leipzig, then Arsenal, and became the kind of defensive midfielder that elite clubs fight over. Serginho Dest went to Barcelona. Tim Wee moved to Celtic, then Lille, then Juventus, threading through exactly the pathway that produces European tournament players. These weren't Americans playing in a comfortable second-tier league to extend a career. They were competing at the highest level of club football on the continent, in the Champions League, in the Bundesliga, in Serie A, getting tested every week by the best teams and coaches in the world. That is what made 2022 different from every US World Cup before it. In Qatar, the United States were placed in a group that most analysts would generously describe as brutal: England, Iran, Wales. On paper, qualification was not guaranteed. The USA not only qualified, they arguably outplayed England in a 0-0 draw that felt, to everyone watching, like the Americans controlled the tactical rhythm. England, a squad carrying Bellingham and Saka and Kane, looked uncomfortable. Against the United States. And even when the USA were eliminated by the Netherlands in the round of 16, the quality of how they played was something that hadn't existed in previous generations. Pressing structure. A defined style. Real tactical coherence. They didn't just compete. They played football with an identity. That identity matters enormously for what comes next in 2026. Here's a fact about home tournaments that rarely enters the conversation when people debate the USA's chances. Since the World Cup began in 1930, no host nation has ever been eliminated before the quarterfinals. Not once. You can trace every tournament that has ever been staged on home soil, from Uruguay in 1930 to Qatar in 2022, and the pattern holds without exception. The host always reaches the last 8. Home advantage in football is real. And it's not just about the noise in the stadium. It's the travel. Every opponent the USA face in 2026 will have crossed an ocean to get there. Jet lag affects performance in ways that don't appear in squad depth charts, but absolutely appear in the second halves of tight knockout games. Sleep disruption compounds across a tournament. A team that arrived 5 days ago still carrying the edge of transatlantic fatigue against a squad that flew 2 hours domestically. That gap is real, even at the elite level. The United States players will sleep in their own time zone for the entire tournament. And the structure of 2026 itself amplifies this. For the first time, the World Cup expands to 48 teams and 104 matches. That means a longer tournament, more recovery time between games, and an expanded group stage where 3 teams advance from each group of 4. More paths to the knockout rounds. More margin for a physically elite, well-coached team to find their rhythm and build genuine momentum across 6 or 7 matches, instead of burning out trying to peak instantly. In shorter tournaments, individual brilliance tends to win. In longer ones, organizational quality, fitness, depth, structure starts to separate the field. The USA has the depth in 2026 to last that distance. Think about what the squad actually looks like. A midfield built around Adams, McKennie, and Reyna. 3 players who between them carry hundreds of top-flight European appearances in the biggest leagues and competitions on the continent. A forward line anchored by Pulisic, one of the most dangerous wide forwards in the Champions League. Goalkeeper depth that includes players operating in high-pressure club environments week to week. And behind that, a coaching structure rebuilt with a very specific ambition in mind. Mauricio Pochettino, who took over the United States national team in 2024, brings something rare to this role. He was the manager who turned Tottenham Hotspur into a Champions League finalist, with a squad that the entire football world agreed was not good enough to be in a Champions League final. He constructed the Paris Saint-Germain side that French football had been promising for a decade. He managed Chelsea through a rebuild. His entire coaching career has been a study in extracting results from talented squads that haven't yet learned to believe in themselves as tournament-level competitors. That is exactly the task in front of him with the United States in 2026. Beyond the tactics, think about what the stadiums in 2026 actually feel like for the opposition. MetLife in New Jersey. The Rose Bowl and SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. Levi's Stadium in San Francisco. These are enormous venues, built for spectacle, in some of the most football-passionate metropolitan areas in North America. Los Angeles alone has a population with cultural ties to football, to specific national teams, to specific club traditions, that makes matchday atmospheres unlike anything most international sides encounter in preparation. The crowd for a USA knockout match at the Rose Bowl in front of 90,000 people will not feel like a neutral venue to the team walking out against them. That psychological weight accumulates. It changes decision-making in tight moments. And tight moments are where knockout football is decided. Look at Croatia in 2018. A squad that no pre-tournament projection placed in a World Cup final, playing with 3 separate extra-time matches in the knockout rounds, running on adrenaline and collective belief, reaching the final against France. Look at Morocco in 2022, eliminating Spain, eliminating Portugal, reaching the last 4 on the back of an organization and defensive structure so complete that opponents spent entire matches unable to find a way through. Neither of those teams was the most talented in the tournament. Both had something harder to manufacture. A functioning system applied with absolute clarity at exactly the right moment in football history. The United States in 2026 is not a miracle waiting to happen. It's a genuinely competitive football nation at the peak of a generational talent cycle, hosting a tournament on home soil for the first time in 32 years. With more rest, more home support, more tactical preparation, more tournament experience in the starting 11, and more structural advantages than any American team in history. Is a USA World Cup title guaranteed? Of course not. France have a squad depth that currently no team in the world can match. Argentina carry the muscle memory of what winning feels like. Brazil, even in transition, arrive at every tournament with a century of institutional knowledge about how to survive in knockout football. But here is what is absolutely true. There will be a night in 2026, probably in a city like Los Angeles or New York, when the United States line up in a quarterfinal or a semifinal in front of 90,000 people who have been waiting their entire lives for this, against a side that flew across the ocean, that is running on accumulated fatigue, that has never played in an atmosphere like this one. And in that moment, for 90 minutes, the USA will be the most dangerous team on that pitch. You remember Tim Howard in 2014. One goalkeeper trying alone to hold back the tide. This time, the tide is running the other way.